Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Business Barbershop Podcast. I am Chris,
I'm keen.
and we're happy to be here. It
Yeah,
is, as of today, it is April 7th, 2026. Michigan is your newly crowned NCAA champion.
I
This was
know.
the worst bracket year I've ever had. My whole family
Yeah.
didn't even pick any of the finalists, which was kind of crazy.
Honestly, I kind of overlooked the entire. It's the first year where the entire tournament kind of just flew past me.
Yeah.
I don't know what I had going on. Well, I mean, I did. And now that I think about it, I kind of do. I did have some personal shit going on. You know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but it was all right. It was a good game. Michigan was clearly the best team, so
Yeah.
they won, which is fine.
I
But
did see some memes
yeah,
of like some like end of the game like whatever, and there's like moments where like they're zooming into like fans or like the coaches saying shit during the game. I can't remember what games those were, but I did see some stuff going around.
yeah, there was this the craziest moment. It was a double crazy moment all at one time. Duke and UConn were playing. Duke was up by 19 points, and and UConn made a last second three from not half court, but pretty close to half court to win the game
Yeah, and it was a
off
steal.
a turnover.
They had to get a
Yeah, they
steal and
stole
then
it.
do it.
Yes. When that shot went in, though, Dan Hurley, the coach of UConn, went up and touched heads with the referee for several seconds right after that shot and then moved on.
Huh.
And everybody was like, what is going on? And the
What
referee
was
was
it?
like, nothing happened. And Dan was like, nothing, it was fine. Nothing happened. So I don't know what happened. I think they were just so like caught up in the moment that they were like, I don't know, but like there was no, it wasn't, it wasn't, there was no anger. Like it wasn't an emotional, like nobody was, it wasn't like he was mad at the ref or anything because they had just made that shot. But Google it and watch it, and it's like, it's
Hmm.
really strange. Anyway, okay, but I digress. Now let's talk about more important things. Iran.
Yeah.
Iran.
Yep.
Okay, so you wanted to talk about the war in terms of its effect on interest rates in the real estate market, and
Hmm.
so I will just
Yep.
I will just tee that up for you and let you take it wherever you want.
Yeah. So I'm gonna get a little bit real estate finance geeky for a moment, but this stuff's important because this is what drove the whole subprime meltdown in 2007 to 2012. Toxic loan features have these maturity and expiration dates to like fixed rate and periods and so forth. And so we're going to get into that. So let's just take a step back. So a lot of us thought that the whole world of like subprime and the way that kind of like just, fucked up the entire residential community, and really almost affected the whole economy worldwide was never going to happen again. And commercial real estate, it's a smaller sector, so it won't have as big of impact. But what happened was following all that stuff that happened, all these adjust rate mortgages, prepayment penalties, balloon payments on seconds, and stuff like that. These relatively toxic loan features, um, they became illegal for residential real estate, especially if it's something you're gonna like a family could move into, right? So, um, and the general thought was is that it's okay to leave that stuff in the world of commercial because investors are more savvy.
That's
They
right.
wouldn't do this shit unless they had a plan,
Yeah.
yada yada yada, right?
Homeowners were getting stuck holding the bag, and they really didn't understand what they were doing.
Or so they said they
Like,
didn't.
I think it's fair to say that they didn't really understand the implications. I think that the idea was like, oh yeah, okay, if that happens, but that's never going to happen. Okay,
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
I digress.
yeah. And so
Commercial, you can still do it in the commercial sector.
yeah, yeah. And not only can you still do it in the commercial sector, but for the most part, it's extremely normal. This is the kind of loans, and to this day, it still hasn't changed. Like even with like if you're going to get a new mortgage out today, for a 5 unit multifamily, or 5 units or more multifamily, and or also any kind of commercial space. This is going to be your retail spaces, your warehouse spaces, whatever. They're um, they're still done the same way, right? They still have a period usually that they're fixed where they can adjust later. They have prepayment penalties, and they very often also have balloon payments, usually all three, which is actually even more toxic than most subprime loans because the subprime era usually would have like two of those three features, but not all three of them. But having all three is relatively normal in the commercial world. And the mistake that these commercial people made was they didn't expect rates to go as high as they did. So a lot of these assets, because they're purchased by investors, are valued based off the cash flow you're going to get on it. And the normal expected down payment for these assets range from 30 to 40% down. Usually, if you have to put 50% down to make a cash flow, you're overpaying. And if it doesn't cash flow at 30% down, well, it's a little bit light. So it's normal to be somewhere between 30 to 40-ish is where normally they expect the normal down payment for these. And if 30 to 40% down doesn't make you positive cash flow, the general consensus is you're overpaying for the asset. The problem with that is that, interest rates change the cash flow so heavily, which is why the average cap rate that people buy these assets are change as interest rates change. So during really low interest rates, people would buy multifamilies at cap rates as low as 4% because they were locking in rates in twos and threes and they would still cash flow. If you guys don't yet know how a cap rate is calculated, a cap rate it's just short for capitalization rate, is the equivalent of like a dividend. If you bought the property cash, you take in all the income, less vacancy, less capital expenditures, less maintenance, less utilities, whatever expenses you have, you'll get a certain amount of income. And that income on an annual basis, divided by the price that you paid for it is your capitalization rate or your cap rate. And so normally things trade for in Washington, they'll trade for in the residential space for about the cap rate that they'll trade for is similar to whatever interest rate you can acquire. Because if you're buying it for lower than that cap rate, you're probably not going to cash flow with 30 to 40% down. That's just how the math works. The problem with that is that if you paid $2 million for a property 5 years ago, in 2021, and the price you paid for it and the down payment you make cash flow then, but it doesn't cash flow now because interest rates are higher, then your asset's worth less. That's how it works. And so a lot of these investors bought commercial real estate, which includes this, which the commercial guys don't like to call multi residential. They like to call anything residential. Like they don't like to say 1 to 4 unit residential. They just think residential just means people live there, right? In their world, a 5+ unit residential is so-called residential. But I digress. That category of assets, and actually all of the commercial stuff, all was inflated because rates were really low, and the general thought was as well, interest rates will go up, but the amount that rates went up and how long they've stayed higher has really hurt a lot of investors. Now, these loans, most of them have a maturity or a fixed rate period of 5 to 7 years is the average. There's some that were longer, but the bulk of them were 5 to 7 years. So if you go back to when rates were low, rates first started going down in 2020. 2020 was the first year COVID happened. So no one was buying shit the first year. I bought stuff, but a lot of people were like, let's wait and see, right? The smart play for most people is let's wait and see. Once there's a moment, they go, oh, wait a minute. Even though there's unemployment and yada, 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 people need a place to live and rates are low. And so rates were going up, the values are going up. And so then all of a sudden that began the real estate flurry where values were going up, right? In all sectors. But anything that was taken on a commercial type loan always was going to have a 5 to 7 year either adjusting rate or maturity period or both, the bulk of them. So 2026, you look forward, 2021, go forward 5 years. This is the first timeline that we have to pay attention to. The first bulk of these loans maturing was this year. But for most investors who thought they were playing their cards right, they're like, well, rates aren't going to go as high. They were wrong about that. And by 2026, when rates are going up, because they've been going up since 2023, maybe by 26 they'll start coming down, which they started coming down some, but there's all these expected milestones that we thought were going to make them go down further. Jerome Powell was going to leave his chairman position, and he's a little bit more hawkish, right? Typically, the chairman is a former Fed governor. Historically, in the last couple of decades, the chairman leaves their role, they don't even take their old governor role. They just leave the Fed altogether. That's a more common thing, right? No one expected that he would maybe stay on.
Yep.
And and there's been a series of events that have happened in the last 12 months that have basically said, "Hey guys, rates are coming down." Um, the One of them was the president was really trying to bully Jerome Powell to leave office early. We've talked about that in previous shows. And they also started doing an investigation over how much money he spent on the Federal Reserve building remodel, right? Well, that mixture of attacking him and investigating him for that has actually fully backfired. A couple of things have happened. One, the a judge who's investigating it said that Powell will stay in his chairman role until the investigation's over. So we all expected that he'd be leaving right about now. It's gonna be like next, like April is supposed to be the end of his term. Now it's
Yep.
going to be until the investigation's over, which we don't know how long that's going to take. In addition to that, um, Powell has said because of Trump's bullying him, that he was worried that this was a sign the Fed wouldn't be as independent as it has been in the past. And because of that, he is going to, although leave his chairman role eventually, he wants to stay on the Fed as a voting governor. You have to remember that when the chairman might come out and tell everyone, and he might have more influence on what the Fed's going to do, but it's ultimately still voted on by a group of governors and the chairman what they're going to do when it comes to interest rates. And so he's going to still have influence on the Fed, and he's not leaving the Fed as a governor. So the Fed's impact of lowering interest rates has been drastically reduced because of all that. So that all very much backfired on Trump. Um, then, in addition to that, which I also think that Trump hasn't really said much about that because he's got himself involved in the war with Iran, which has become the main headline news.
Yeah.
And the war with Iran has also been very bad for interest rates because one of the worst things for long-term interest rates is inflation. And one of the things that impacts inflation on a high level is energy costs, i.e., oil. So when the Strait of Hormuz gets closed and oil prices start shooting up, we all feel it right now. Gas prices $6, $7 a gallon in the
Yes.
Seattle area,
Ridiculous.
right?
Yeah.
It's not just the inflation of what we pay when we fill our cars. It's that all the goods being transported from manufacturers to wholesale to retail locations, from those locations to your front door, if it's from Amazon, all those costs have gone up because of energy costs, which then is inflationary across the board for anything. So all travel costs, for our personal travel, airfare travel, all that gets inflated immediately. And then there's a passive effect on all goods being transported because they all need energy to be transported. So energy costs are very inflationary when it comes to global inflation because of the fact that they increase the cost of all goods. And so when inflation is very bad for long-term interest rates. And so the sum of all those things is why rates went back up. Now, luckily, there was a moment where we're creeping close to 7% 30-year fixed rates again, and it's settled. We've actually had a couple of weeks, almost 2 straight weeks of improvements, but 2 weeks straight of improvements after almost losing an entire interest rate. We lost about, almost an entire interest rate. We went from like high fives to high sixes, and now it's settling back into like low mid sixes. But we for sure have started going the wrong direction, and it's kind of plateauing. But now it's good that we aren't back at 7%. But here's the thing: in the world of like residential, in my world, I can stomach that shift. For a moment, it got really ugly, and within 2 weeks, it settled. And we do 30, doing 30 fixed loans. But if you're a commercial guy who took out a 5 year or 7 year loan between 5 to 7 years ago, you were hoping that all those events were going to cause rates to go down. Now, there's a moment you realize you probably overpaid for your asset when rates went up really high, about 2 years ago. But there's still this moment of like in 2024, you could say, in 2 years when my loan's due, I either have the option of selling at a loss, which may or may not be the equity of what I put down, may or may not be enough to cover that difference, right? But if I'm lucky, if rates don't come down enough, I just gave up my down payment only and I give the property back by selling it for cheaper. But you're hoping that if rates keep coming down because rates are going up to 23, you say, okay, 24 is coming down, 25 is coming down. You're hoping that trend is going to continue. And this was a big milestone year. We're really counting on that trend continuing. The Fed with Jerome Powell leaving, right? Inflation getting more under control, that maybe not protecting all of your losses, but enough that you could maybe put in a little bit extra, refinance, or sell it for a modest loss. And that it that has gone away. And because of
Yes.
and not only that, but there's no real signs that the things that we hope to improve are going to, that the things that we're hoping to improve are going to get drastically better before these loans become due. Now, I do see that the the powers that be have noticed that. We've talked a little bit how there's a little bit of Fed infusion and some of it's like shorter term bonds, which can help that space. But overall, all those things that they did at the beginning of the year to try to help that space have all been negated by all the news that's happened in the last 3 months. And there's no signs it's going to get drastically better in the next year or two. And so it pushes for a big correction. Banks are extremely worried. The investors are extremely worried, and they should be. Now, that might scare a lot of people. But here's the truth, though, too. There are people, cities are rezoning properties to try to help shelter some of the issues, right? I mean, the city of Seattle, the new mayor has this crazy idea that they want to tax the owners for having their buildings vacant. I'm like, I don't see how that helps. They're already losing their ass. Now you want to just kick a man while they're down. All you're doing is going to send
Right.
more properties back to the bank. That's a terrible idea. Just shows how little they know about finances. But what I'd also say though is that that creates an immense opportunity. I mean, that's the whole story. It's really sad, but that's the whole story of how generational wealth gets created in America, right? It always happens in these kind of like black swan events where some people are ready and they
Yeah.
can capitalize on buying assets for a good price. Technically, um, our our condo conversion that we're doing is signs of that, right? That property with low interest rates would have sold for $2 million. We pushed the price down. We basically netted a price of about 1.8, right? That I don't see that asset being as heavily impacted. I don't think that we could have got a ton. We maybe could have got it a little cheaper if we waited after all this news happened, but it didn't have signs that would have been massively cheaper because this is impacting 5+ units more. But why would someone pay the same price for 4 units as they would five, even though the financing is a lot
Yeah.
worse? It just doesn't make a ton of sense. So it does put a downward pressure on the whole multifamily sector. Multifamily as a whole is
But
is
plus you
is
didn't
getting
have when the
cheaper.
interest rates are lower too, you just have more room to raise your price because the math still works, right?
Right. That's right. So so what does that all mean? It means, unfortunately, for some people who took out these loans 5 and 7 years ago, right? Uh, 5 years ago, and then 7 years ago, starting from next year and the year after that, that the the general consensus of what was going to help shelter part of their losses or all their losses is going away. But for people who are buying, if you can pick the right assets, especially ones that could be value added, like the way we're doing ours. Ours aren't being evaluated based off of its ability to cash flow, right? Ours are being evaluated based off the value of luxury condominiums in the area.
Yeah.
So we have a different way we're looking at it. So it gives more spread on an improved margin for people who are repurposing an asset on a value add basis. Um, but that's the story of all markets, right? I made a bunch of money during COVID, and it wasn't because the market was good. I bought all these great multifamilies. I did lock in really low interest rates in West Seattle, but the reason why I was able to get them, and these are properties that had been in these people's families for 25, sometimes 50. The last one I bought, it had been their family for like 80 years, and you know, um, and when West Seattle had the bridge go down and COVID started, there was all the landlords there were just freaking out. Like it was like they felt like they're being hit times two. Everyone
Yeah.
has to deal with COVID, and then our main access to the city of Seattle just went down, and vacancies on those multifamilies went up like 30%. And that's the story of how wealth is created, right? That you either jump on like some people will take it, will benefit from it, and then there's the bigger the losers are, the bigger the winners are on the other side of it.
Yeah, you just have to be able to recognize when opportunity strikes, just like, the great Warren Buffett says, when others are greedy, be fearful. When others are fearful, be greedy.
Hmm.
So these things are always cyclical. You just want to do your best to not be getting in at the top. Like when there's and you actually were getting in the whole time, but you still were doing it in a way that was not really related, I would say, to the frenzy. You know, it was you're still making like rational choices, finding
Yeah, I
good
mean, you also have to
opportunities.
recognize when you have an advantage too. Like too many
Yeah,
people discount their own personal advantage. So when I was buying these, right? Like for instance, I bought a 6 unit multifamily. So normally that would have classified under commercial. But it turns out that that particular property was on two parcels. So even though it was 6 units, it was three and three. I could have done one commercial loan the whole thing, but I was able to do two separate regular residential loans. But more importantly, there was a massive condo upside also. And so when I bought that 6 unit in Alki, I bought it, I broke them up into condos, and I locked them in at 30-year fixed rates. Most of it was under 30-year fixed rates that were super low, and um, and and did that in a time where yes, I still had to deal with the vacancies the other landlords were, but my other advantage I had was I was a banker. I was a banker who was just making a ton of money helping people refinance their
right.
mortgages 2-3%. So the
Yeah,
question was for me was, can I weather the storm of this vacancy? Basically, do I think that the West Seattle Bridge will be back up while I could still stomach these vacancies? And my answer was yeah. I mean, the amount of money I was making during that time, now I eventually got them all filled. So I wasn't making, I was putting money to the side. Eventually they all got filled. So I'm like, it's fine. It's cash flowing. So I'm good. But
yep.
um, even after I dropped the rent rates a little bit, but even if I stayed 30% vacant on those during that entire time, if I never got those things filled, I was making enough money. I could have just kept on stashing that money to the side. But I didn't use that opportunity to buy every. There was a lot of multifamily in West Seattle that came up during that time, and I was just handpicking the value add
Yeah.
that had the
The other thing
value
too
add that
was
I
at
was looking
that,
for.
yeah, the other thing too at that time, the greed wasn't really in your market. Everybody and their brother was just buying their like a personal residences because you know, the interest rates were so low and there was so much cash flowing around from everybody that they were
There's
just
greed that pushed
make
up prices, but the prices have stayed up because there's that lock-in effect of those interest rates, and no one's going to
yeah,
sell their house for massive loss when they have it locked in at 2 or 3% interest rates, right?
yep,
Doesn't make sense. That's why the values have stayed high. But that's not happening in the commercial space because they can't hold on to those low rates forever. Their time is running
correct.
out.
Well, they reset. You know,
Hmm.
you also in the commercial space, not necessarily, I don't think necessarily in the residential commercial space, but in the other commercial spaces, you also had the like the double whammy of the nature of the way that people use offices really changing, you know, maybe not forever, but certainly uh ongoing. You know, you
Right.
just you like because you're using those income numbers to base the to determine the value. So you also have that number coming down in a lot of these office buildings because they're just empty, you know, or
Hmm.
they're like they're not empty, but they are significantly underfilled, you know.
Right.
And so now you don't even have the valuation from the rent to back up even the best number you can come up with is still way lower than it was when you did it because there's just no money coming in, you know.
Right.
I make that's like who's the Bellevue guy? He recently had to turn over several of his buildings. Do you know who I'm talking about? I can't remember what his
Oh,
name
it's a
is.
Seattle guy, Martin Selig.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's it's this like that's the world of
And the guy who
commercial
developed the
development.
South, yeah, the guy who developed the Southport development on Lake Washington, Renton, right on the
Yep.
water.
Yeah.
All that's going back too.
Yep.
That's a really sad story, you know.
Well, you know, like I don't know. Is it really sad though? Is it really sad?
Oh yeah, it is. Because no one wants to say, oh, well, boo-hoo, the multimillionaire loses everything. But if you actually listen to the details of what happened, you're like, dude, that's so fucked up. So the story in the Southport one, from I heard from a friend of a friend, was is that he was because he owned all those apartments on the landing too. So when I first heard the news that he was going to sell the apartments to finish developing Southport, I thought, oh man, that sounds like a mistake. You should just
Yeah.
hold on to those apartments. So I thought he had made a dumb decision, but it's not what happened. He already had leases signed, but like they had him signed from what the hell from Alibaba. Remember the
Yeah.
company that's yeah. So the lease is signed, like we're going to be full.
Yep.
But the Chinese government yanked it away and said, look, if you try to put an office space in the U.S. outside of China, we're going to shut you guys down. So they had to break the lease, and that's the only reason why he took all his money put into it because he thought he was occupied. That's how
Yeah.
that whole thing went down. So yeah, that guy busted his ass, made huge amounts of wealth, right? His family owned the land. He waited for the right time to develop it, and then when the signs looked right, he leaned into it, and then he had the rug yanked out from underneath him. And yeah, he could have chose not to do that, but most people who never get any success never give those they never say, oh, boo hoo, the millionaire lost everything. But there was a lot of blood sweat and tears that built up what he had. And
Yeah, yeah, yes. But I just think, look, like what's the cardinal rule? Like never multiply what you have by zero, you know?
it is, but
Eh,
the hard part with real estate is that a lot of these guys, I know because I see it. I'm not saying that I wouldn't prevent making the same mistake, but I've done versions of it, but be able to shelter it. But like, you do, your wealth is built on leverage, and your leverage is always kind of like knowing what you know. I know what I know, so I'm going to lean into what I know.
yeah.
And so, you do it until it doesn't work. But sometimes when it doesn't work, you lose everything. But he's only replicating what he did to get to where he was at.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm just saying it's like uh, my only comment was just about I feel bad for him. Like he's just playing the game. He's
Yeah.
gonna be fine. He's gonna still have he has a tremendous amount of personal wealth, I would imagine. I mean, so he's gonna
Uh,
do okay.
he's losing it. He's losing all of it. So
Yeah,
his main assets he was still holding that were cash flowing was the multifamily down there. And he sold all of that to go into that development to finish it. And now he's giving that back to the bank. He lost it all.
I know, but he'll find his way. He'll find his way. He didn't put every single penny of his whole net worth into that thing.
No, but it was like it would be like me losing all of my rentals.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
90%.
right.
It's like 90%. From the sources I got, that guy's fucked. And he's not a young guy. He's smart.
No,
He
he's
did
old
all this
dude.
stuff before. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
He'll find
and
another
Martin,
deal though. I mean, somebody would pull. Why wouldn't you bring somebody like that in on a deal with you to help? You know?
yeah, possibly. You know, no bank's gonna touch him for a little while though. You know.
No, but he could consult or he could fundraise or he could do something. Probably. I don't know. It's you don't look, I'm not rooting for the guy to lose, that's for sure. That's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But it is just part of it's part of the game. Part of
Yeah.
the game. When you're
Yeah.
playing big stakes, like man, you got the opportunity to win really big and
Opportunity to lose really big.
dang.
Yeah.
Yep, you do. You do.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't want to see it, but it's like the circle of life,
Yeah.
a little bit. So anyway,
Yeah.
interesting. Interesting.
But the
What
short version of it
yeah,
is that all these multifamily guys who are thinking they're going to get relief between 26 and 27
right.
before the loans reset are not going to get that relief, which means that we have a good 2 year run of deal opportunity in that space. But if you're in a position to be able to take advantage of it, then there's going to be a lot of wealth created in the next 2 years because of this.
Yeah.
It's going to come at the expense of some other people's losses, but all you can do is do the best with what's in front of you.
What is your prediction for the Iran war? What do you think is going to happen? And
You
if it
know,
ends early, let's say it is resolved before we get your prediction. Let's say it is resolved. Hypothetically, does that change your forecast? Do you think that will
well,
alleviate this pressure in a lot of
some
ways?
of it, some of it. It represents, I would say it represents a little bit more than half of the increase in rate that we had. But the thing that they were all hoping for was more Fed influence to lower rates. And that will influence the Fed. They could start lowering rates some because of the inflation issue. But it's, whatever influence that Powell has staying in the Fed is not going away. And so
Yeah.
um, it'll make things better, um, which is all any of them could ever hope for. But I think that I don't think the war is going anywhere for a while. I know Trump keeps talking about how he's going to end it soon, but
Yep.
I don't,
We'll see.
I can't really forecast how that's possible. I don't disagree. A lot of people are like really beating him up over attacking Iran. My thing is that whenever I hear about a war happening with a country, there's so much media that kind of goes out. Some of it's polarized about like, left side versus right side. I
Oh,
just I
100%.
I just jump over all that and immediately go to every friend and colleague I know that's from that country. I always want to hear what they have to say first,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
it changes the tune of the conversation I have with other people because I have other people say like, "Oh man, this and that and Ukraine war." I'm like, ask all my friends that are Ukrainian, see what they say first. In this case, I have some friends that are Persian, they're from Iran, and I mean, their opinion is going to be a little bit biased because obviously, if they like their former country, they would have stayed there. But they're like, their response is this was going to happen eventually, and all they're doing is preventing terrorist attacks and potentially a worse war. And so, if it's now, then let it be now. But there's no chance. There's no chance that we're not going to that this wasn't going to eventually happen, or if
Yeah.
if we didn't handle it now when it was handled later, it could have been a lot worse. So they're all kind of yay, get those people out of there. But I
Yeah.
think that what's happening is Trump is finding out that Iran is not Venezuela, and getting those people out of office was only a fraction of the problem. All the military people have basically taken back control of the country, and they still have control of all the missiles and all that stuff. And they're going to fight to hold on to their way of thinking.
Yeah. Well, they're extremists, like, so they're willing to fight and die probably for,
Their ideology says that they're gonna have a great afterlife because of it.
right. But that's also kind of why, you know, invading, mm, you know, you don't want them to have a nuclear weapon.
Definitely not.
That I think is what the catalyst was for a lot of this is they just kept inching closer and closer, then it's like, well, okay, you have the opportunity. And by the way, I'm no expert on any of this. This is just me shooting from the hip. But you got to think. I think if I will say this, the one thing that gives me not confidence, but like less anxiety about this is Trump has shown over and over again that he's not really interested in like nation building. You know, he would prefer to just take the bad people out and just let Iran figure out what it's going to do
But the
than
problem is that
bring
turned right into
democracy
like
to the.
yeah. So he cut off the head of the snake, but there's kind of two snakes going on. There's the people in the government roles, and then there's people in the military roles. And once he cut off the government head of the snake, the military people they said, okay, well, we'll just take over both.
Well,
And he
yeah,
just
I
kept
mean
on.
they're all together. They all have the same. They all have the same views. So you're still working on dismantling that government philosophy, or I don't know how you would describe it, but I don't think he's necessarily interested in bringing democracy to Iran. He would
No,
just prefer to get anyone in there that's just not, you know, walking around with those extreme views. You know,
yeah,
I think that that's what he cares about, which is nice because that hasn't been, the case in the past.
yeah.
Like no one's making the case for bringing democracy to Iran. It's more like let's just get these tyrannical people out and make it so they
Let the
can't
people who
create
have been
nuclear
oppressed,
weapons.
yeah, and let the people who have been oppressed that live there, who are happy
Yeah.
that they're out, set up a new government.
Yeah. 'Cause I don't know much about Iran, but before these people came into power, it was supposedly like a pretty metropolitan, like forward thinking kind of a place, right? I think.
Um, I mean, this all happened in the 70s. They had a sheik that I think was, that was basically like a royal family.
Yeah.
And, and the entire basis that they've been saying is that we were that the government that was in place that got taken over was basically just a puppet for the Western culture. And they've been saying that ever since then. We're
Yeah.
not going to be we're not going to be a puppet under the Western culture. And they embraced the extreme Islam, you know, ideology, and that and they're more than happy to die for their beliefs because they believe it's going to give them this afterlife of
Right.
whatever
Yep.
21 virgins for every guy or whatever that he believes is going
Yep.
to happen in their heaven for dying for their belief. And
Right.
so, unfortunately, it's very much still a religious war, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. 100%.
Hmm.
Yep. Interesting. Interesting.
I wish I could
Okay.
answer more than that. The thing is, I probably can speak more intelligent about it than most people who are arguing about it. But the more you know about it, the harder it is to say you have a solution to what people could have done that's right. Like I think it's good you got those people out of office, but I wouldn't have a plan. Like, and people could criticize Trump for saying he didn't have a plan for when the military is going to do what they're doing now. But if you're saying if I was in charge, could I have had a better plan? I'm like, that ain't me, so I'm not here to judge.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, look, these
it's
things aren't clean either. It's not like it'd be great if the other side just did exactly what you wanted them to do,
right.
but you're having to react in some ways to what they do. And you know, it's not always clean,
No,
unfortunately.
far from it. Far from it. All I could do is hope. I just hope that it, ends soon and that they can get the government that the people there want. The people, if I could tell this, the citizens of Iran were very happy when the regime that, in the government positions were removed. I think that they were shocked as anyone that it's dragged out as long as it has since then. They didn't expect the military to take the same what they did.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard. That's why I kind of, just want to give grace to our government for not having the right plan. But it's like if the people who live there were happy about what we did, and then now we're both kind of surprised and not happy with the second stage of how that's going, then you know, who's someone to throw shade? Like, could you have predicted exactly what was going to happen? All people can do is say, well, they should have known better. It's like, well,
Yeah.
would you have known better? We're all human, right?
Well, yeah. And there are other sort of third level consequences that we are playing checkers and a lot of other people are playing chess, because like China
Hmm.
right now is getting smoked right now, I think, because a lot of their oil and a lot of their stuff comes from Iran. So I think,
Hmm.
there are these other factors in play that, and look, it's only been like a month, I think, right? That's like not a really, if you're there and you're getting bombed, it's a really long time.
Hmm.
But, 4 weeks, not that long in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
So I don't know. What else? Anything else you want to talk about?
Nope.
Okay. Well, let's wrap it
That's
up
it.
then.
Yeah.
We'll let you get recover from your sickness,
Yeah.
from your illness.
Yeah, get rid of this cold. But if you have the means of, doing, there's a lot of money being made when people converted hotels to like multifamily, like, value add
Yeah.
converted value during COVID. I think there's going to be a lot of that in the upcoming months, repurposing office spaces in a multifamily, repurposing multifamily into residential condos. I think that there's going to be room for both of those. But it's going to primarily happen in the 5+ unit space. So
Yeah.
it does take a skill set to know how to do it. It's not something you can just flip a switch and know how to do tomorrow. But if you can figure it out, there's going to be deals in the next couple years.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, let's wrap it up.
Yep.
I am Chris.
I'm keen.
This is the Business Barbershop Podcast.
See you
See
guys
you
later.
later.